Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are all having the best day today. If you're new here, welcome. We talk about true crime cases here on this channel, so if that's something you're into, then come join us. Make sure to subscribe. Today we're talking about a solved case which took place back in 1991 in Northern Ireland, and it wasn't solved until 2010, so it took 19 years to solve, and to be honest, it's mostly due to shitty police work. You guys will see. I'm sure you will be just as frustrated as I was when I was researching this case. Before we do get into it, I just quickly want to thank today's sponsor, Aura, because it is so important to protect your personal information nowadays, especially with the amount of your information that gets sold online. If you Google your name, I would say there's a pretty good chance that there is some personal sensitive information that you don't want out there, like your full name, your address, your medical records, your family records. I actually Googled my friend's name and her full address came up, and she was so shocked when I told her. But data brokers will sell your information to literally anyone, to scammers, spammers, hackers. They don't care who they're selling it to, which is exactly why I use Aura, because they will go on and they will show you all of the data brokers who are selling your information, and they will automatically submit opt-out requests and clean up your information online. It not only helps to reduce spam, I genuinely, before using Aura, had to turn off my email notifications, which is not ideal in my job because I just got so much spam. But it also helps to protect you from hackers that would use this information in not great ways, to say the least. I mean, think of all of the data breaches there have been. Even recently, there was the Optus one in Australia where 10 million past and present customers had their customer records leaked. And then there was the AT&T data breach where 73 million past and present customers had their data released and sold to the dark web. But if you have Aura, you don't even have to worry about, like, if your name pops up in one of these data breaches, you don't even have to stress, because all of the things that these companies tell you to do in these data breach situations, Aura automatically does all of that for you. So I highly recommend checking Aura out. You can get a 14-day free trial at my link, aura.com/bellafiore, and you can figure out what information of yours is being sold. So highly recommend. I will leave all of the information and the link in my description box down below. And let's go ahead and get into today's case. So Colin Howell was born on the 14th of March in 1959 in Portadown, Northern Ireland, and he grew up in Belfast. He was the second youngest of 5 children. So he had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and he was super close with his dad Sam. They were very outdoorsy. They'd go fishing together and just do a lot of outdoor activities together. And the family was also deeply religious, and they were devout members of the Baptist church. They would go to 3 services every Sunday, so very devout. When Colin was 13, he decided he wanted to be a missionary for the church overseas. So he planned to go to school to become a doctor and then get into that kind of missionary work. But his grades just weren't quite good enough to get him into medical school. So instead, he went on to study dentistry at Queen's University in Belfast. He was studying there in 1980. He was 21 years old at the time, and it was then that he met 20-year-old Lesley Clark. She was this beautiful, popular girl. She was studying nursing. She was from Plymouth and had one brother named Chris, and she had moved to Belfast to work on her nursing degree and did clinic training in the hospital. And she finished top of her class. She started working in the geriatrics unit and got along super well with her patients there because she was very personable. She lived in a share house with 6 of her girlfriends, and she would travel with them, went to Europe with them. And she and Colin had very different personalities. I guess they kind of balanced each other out. Colin was this super quiet, shy guy. He was a bit of an outsider. He mostly kept to himself. And then Lesley was this super well-liked, very easy to get along with girl. She was known to be warm and thoughtful and outgoing. She was very worldly. She was witty, and she had an amazing sense of humor, was very independent, but they were both very ambitious people and both raised in devout Protestant homes. Lesley was part of an evangelical youth club, and she was part of the choir there. But where Colin was like super devout, wouldn't even go to pubs, it was kind of why he was such an outsider at school and college. Lesley, on the other hand, would, she would still sneak off to go to the pubs with her friends on occasion, have a drink or 2, that sort of thing. Lesley was actually Colin's first ever serious relationship, and he fell for her immediately, but she kind of took a little bit of time to warm up to him. She was going on other dates at the start, which made Colin pretty jealous. But once she did warm up to him, that was it, you know. She knew that he was the one and that they were going to get married, and they did get married in July of 1983 at the Windsor Baptist Church shortly after Colin graduated with his dentistry degree. In 1984, they moved to Coleraine and rented a house there where Colin got his first job as a dentist, and Lesley was working as a nurse at the Coleraine Hospital. Lesley made friends there with other young married women through a Bible study group. They had joined the Coleraine Baptist Church and they were super active in the church activities, and their whole life, you know, really revolved around the church. Colin was made leader of the youth fellowship there, and they were just really getting settled in their lives. Lesley was really excited to start a family with Colin. She loved him. She thought he was just such a great guy, even saying that she thought he was modeled after Christ. They had their first child in 1984, a son named Matthew, and Lesley decided to stop working at the Coleraine Hospital because honestly it just didn't kind of mesh well for her, that hospital. So she decided to leave her work there and instead work as a stay-at-home mum. In 1986, she gave birth to their second child, a daughter named Lauren, and this birth came just 10 weeks after her mother died. So it was a very, very traumatic time for Lesley, and she suffered some pretty bad postpartum depression. Then in 1988, Colin decided to leave his dentistry place that he was working at, go out on his own and start his own dental practice, which he kitted out with top of the range everything, which he really sent the family into a lot of debt doing, but he was like, it's fine, you know, we're gonna get a lot of clients, we're gonna make it all back, it's fine. But it really did not go as well as he had planned. The next year in 1989, Lesley gave birth to their third child, a son named Daniel, even while the family was in immense debt. And then they also decided, or Colin decided, to buy a house for the family, which didn't even have like flooring, the cabinetry wasn't done because I think it was like a newly built house, so it was kind of left so that the new owners would be able to make it their own, do their own flooring that they wanted, choose their own cabinetry, that sort of thing. But they really didn't have the money to do that, so they had no flooring. The house was just like totally unfinished, and they had 3 young kids. They couldn't even get furniture. Like, they didn't even have the money for furniture because of Colin's dental practice that he had put all of this money into, and it just wasn't making them money. But despite all of this, Colin was still really happy because by this point he was 30 years old. He was a devoted father to 3 beautiful children, a devoted husband to a beautiful wife. He was a successful businessman with his own dental practice, and he was also a respected leader in the church. You know, from the outside, this is what everybody saw, and from the outside it really looked like they were just the perfect family and everything was going really well for them. But behind the scenes, things really, I'm sure you can imagine, were not so great. Lesley adored her children. She lived and breathed for her kids, but she was really struggling to find fulfillment. You know, she was this strong, independent, hardworking, ambitious woman, and now, you know, she couldn't go to work, which she really missed doing. They were having a lot of financial problems, and she was also really, really struggling with postpartum depression. And then on top of all of this, shortly after the birth of her third child, she found out that Colin had been having an affair with one of his classmates from college who was also married. Colin claimed that it was just a fling, that it only lasted a few weeks. It was over before Lesley even found out. But of course, like, Lesley's already struggling with so many other things. She's not feeling fulfilled. She's got postpartum depression, and then she finds out this. So it was just such a blow to her self-esteem, to the marriage. But they wanted to, you know, they had 3 children together. Lesley loved him, so they wanted to work through it. They were trying to work through it together, but this was not the only problem in their marriage. Lesley actually went out one day to the bank to get cash out so that she could get groceries to feed the family, and that's when she found out that all of their accounts were severely overdrawn. Colin had taken all of the money that he could, like completely overextended every single one of their accounts for the dental practice and left absolutely nothing for the family. And the dental practice wasn't even doing well, obviously, because that's why they were in so much debt. And it was just really hard for Lesley. It was so, so disappointing for Lesley because, like I said, before she met him, she was this independent, ambitious, hardworking woman. She made her own money. She saved her money. She did it well. You know, she even had money aside that she could use to go traveling. struggling, and now she just had to rely on this man who was like just letting the whole family down. She trusted him to handle the finances for the family while she looked after the children, and he was just not doing a lot right. They had no money, not even for basic expenses for the family. Colin blamed this on late reimbursement from insurance, but it was just an excuse. You know, the dental practice was not doing well. He had totally overspent. He had been having all of these meetings with the bank to try and increase their overdraft limit to put them in even more debt. He even considered handing the practice over to somebody else. He considered selling their house, and this financial stress was just a huge strain on their marriage on top of everything else, as I'm sure you can imagine. But Colin was also somebody who was very prideful. He was obsessed with what other people thought of him. He was very obsessed with his public image, so he didn't want to get rid of the dental practice. He didn't want to sell the house because he didn't want to do that and people think, oh, they're selling the house, they must be struggling. Oh, they're getting rid of the dental practice, they must be struggling. He didn't care how much financial strain it put on him and his family and his marriage, as long as it all looked good from the outside. As long as people thought, he's got a dental practice, he's got a house, they must be doing amazing. Lesley was fully ready to leave him. Like, she even at one point called up the dental practice and talked to the receptionist and was like, how much money is in the cash box? Leave it aside because I'm gonna come and get it because I'm leaving Colin. And Colin overheard this call and said to the receptionist, no, hide the cash, I'm gonna talk to her. Lesley comes in and he managed to convince Lesley not to leave him. But by this point, it just seemed like the marriage was almost irreparably damaged. Lesley she longed for a divorce, truly, but she hadn't worked in 5 years by this point. She just found out that she was pregnant with their 4th child. They were in so much debt, and she knew that if she left him, half of that debt would transfer over to her. She was really suffering with postpartum depression, so much so that some days she could hardly even get out of bed. She could hardly do anything but care for the children some days. She would force herself out of bed to, give them milk for their cereal or get them ready for the day. She could hardly even get herself to do anything around the house. Thankfully, Colin was a pretty good dad, so he would really try and take that burden off her. He not that the kids are a burden, you know what I mean, but he would really try to give her some time to herself to rest and recuperate. He would try to take the kids as much as he could around his work schedule. He quit playing sports with his friends so he could be with the kids more, but it was just not a good time, and Lesley was just doing her best. She was trying to make it work. She still loved him and she thought he was a great dad. She was remembering all the reasons why she loved him, and she still thought that he was a good person. And also they're very religious, so divorce just really wasn't an option. But then things really only got worse for the couple in 1990 when Colin met Hazel Buchanan. Hazel was 27 years old at the time. She was born in 1963 in Omagh in Northern Ireland. She was one of 10 children, and her family was also part of the Baptist church and would spend most of their free time there when they weren't working on the family farm. But Hazel did not love the farm life, and she was pretty much just waiting for the day when she could leave it behind and start a family of her own somewhere else, which is exactly what she did in 1980. She was 17 years old and she met this guy named Trevor Buchanan. He was a few years older than her, and Hazel was his first serious girlfriend. They got married the next year when Hazel was 18 and Trevor was 22, and the relationship just seemed like it was a great influence on Trevor. He was religious but not quite as devout as Hazel. They had 2 children together, and Hazel motivated him to drink less, to quit smoking, to get ahead in his job and provide for their family. He also wasn't super religious before they met, and she encouraged him to become more committed to his Baptist faith, which he did, and he ended up really getting into it. And he just worshipped the ground that she walked on. He treated her like a queen. By 1986, their daughter was 5 and their son was 4, and the family moved to Coleraine. Trevor would pay for all of the furniture that Hazel wanted. She had nice clothes. He would do whatever he could to make her happy. In Coleraine, he was working as an RUC constable. 3 of his 5 brothers actually served as RUC officers, and Trevor, being the youngest, wanted to follow in their footsteps. Hazel worked as a stay-at-home mum and looked after the kids, which she loved doing. The house was always spick and span. She was very true to her faith and maintained her presence at the church. She and Trevor attended the same church as Colin and Leslie, Lesley, the Coleraine Baptist Church. And by all accounts, she was a great wife. She was a great mother. She loved her kids, but she just felt like there was something missing, like she wasn't fulfilled. So she decided to take on a job at the Mount Sandal Nursery in Coleraine, which did actually cause a lot of tension in her and Trevor's relationship, because I guess she was becoming more independent, and that made him nervous because Hazel had grown up very sheltered. Her parents really protected her from the world, and then she met Trevor when she was so young. She was 17 years old and she just jumped straight into that, and they started a family and she became a stay-at-home mom, and she didn't really experience the world all that much. Like, she didn't have a lot of life experience. And then after 8 years of being a housewife, she decides to go and get a job. She's going out more by herself, going for bike rides. She's becoming more independent. She was letting Trevor look after the kids a lot more, and I guess Trevor was just insecure and he was unsure how to handle this change that she was going through. He was also away a lot for work, so things was just kind of building up. There was a lot of tension building up. They were arguing a lot. And I guess it was sort of a grass is greener sort of situation. You know, Hazel had this loving husband, beautiful children, but she just felt like she was missing something, like there was more out there for her. She wanted something more exciting. And in the spring of 1990, she found just that. She found that excitement in another man, another married man. So Colin, Leslie, Hazel, and Trevor all went to the same church, and then Colin and Leslie's 3-year-old daughter also went to the nursery that Hazel worked at. So they had all kind of seen each other around. Hazel and Colin had seen each other around, but that was all it was. Like, there wasn't anything more to it. But then in early summer, late spring of 1990, Colin, who was 31 at the time, decided to take his 2 eldest children, who were 3 and 5, for swimming lessons with a bunch of other kids there. And Hazel also went to this pool to do laps and swim herself. And that is where Colin really took notice of her. He became enamored with her. He saw her in her bathing suit in the pool and he was just like, I must have her. So the very next time he went to the swimming lesson, the second swimming lesson, he brought his own togs. He went into the pool where Hazel was doing laps. And, while his kids are having swimming lessons, he's going over to Hazel and he's like, hey, I can hold you around your waist while you swim in place and I'll kind of give you some pointers. Which, what does this man know about swimming? I don't even know. He is not a swim instructor, but Hazel was like, sure. From there, it just escalated. There was a time when Colin was holding her waist and he kind of stroked up her leg very high, and then was like, I'm not having innocent thoughts about you, Hazel. And Hazel was like, I'm not so innocent either. And then they ended up just getting in a full-blown affair. The actual physical affair started one day when the church had organized a beach day, and Colin offered to take the 2 kids on this beach day so Leslie could have a day at home by herself to rest and relax. And then Hazel also took her 2 children to this beach day. At the beach day, they're hanging out. Colin says, after it's all said and done, says, why don't you bring your kids back to my place so we can, get all of the sand off them, get them cleaned up. And Hazel agrees, and they go back to Colin's place where Leslie is there asleep. And at one point, they're in there cleaning the kids up. Colin just pulls Hazel into another bedroom, leaving all the kids in the bathroom, and just macks on with her while his wife is sleeping in the other room. And then they just started sleeping together all throughout the summer of 1990. They had a special spot they would go to, Castle Row Forest Park. Very romantic, I know what you're thinking. They fully pretended that they would do guitar lessons together to spend more time together. So Colin would go over to Hazel and Trevor's house and pretend to be teaching her the guitar. I don't know if he actually did teach her the guitar a little bit, because one time Trevor came home and Colin and Hazel were sitting on the couch with their guitars out, and Trevor was just like, there's something weird about this. He immediately got the vibes and was like, this doesn't seem good. And he pulled Hazel aside and he's like, what's going on? And Hazel's like, it's nothing, it's just guitar lessons. But it was not just guitar lessons, was it? It's no wonder he found or had his suspicions, because Colin and Hazel were ballsy with it. They would sleep together at Trevor and Hazel's house while Trevor was at work. Colin would sneak into their house while Trevor was asleep, and they would have sex there while Trevor was asleep 2 doors down. They would do it in Colin's dental office after all of the staff had gone home. They would meet up at the park. Like, they would just, neighbors saw them, people saw them. So they were just very ballsy with it. And in more ways than one, because they were not using protection. By August of 1990, Hazel actually found out she was pregnant, and she had been sleeping with both Colin and her husband. So she didn't know whose baby it was. Didn't want to risk it, of course, so she decided to terminate the pregnancy. And Colin was like, I know just the place, because this was not his first rodeo. When him and Lesley started dating before they got married, they had premarital sex, right? And he is obviously like a stranger to contraception or something, I don't know, because he got Lesley pregnant 3 times before their marriage, and he was like, look, I'm just not ready to be a dad. I haven't finished my degree yet. I'm not ready for it. And he insisted that Lesley get an abortion, which she was very uncomfortable with, but she was worried that Colin would leave her if she didn't get the abortion. So he took her to London, because abortion was illegal in Belfast at the time. Took her to London to this clinic to get these abortions, 3, 2 of which were just weeks apart. Lesley felt incredibly guilty about these abortions, but Colin ended up taking Hazel to the exact same clinic that he had taken Lesley to all those years earlier. I mean, this guy is really, really the worst. And insisting on abortions instead of just using contraception, I don't know, it was like a foreign concept to him. But side note, this may have even contributed to this, but he was like addicted to porn, had a very insatiable sexual appetite, and he was so addicted to porn in college that, or probably still, but in college he like went and confessed a bunch of times to people at his church and his pastors like, look, I'm super addicted, and he had to put software on his computer to prevent him from accessing porn, which he just found ways to work around anyway. Like, he would go on his work computer or whatever. He just really couldn't help himself, and maybe that was a contributing factor to all of this, why he kept cheating, why he hated contraception apparently. Anyway, so he and Hazel snuck away to London, obviously lying to their partners about what they were doing, and Hazel left Trevor a letter that read, going through a really hard time, don't worry about me, don't try to find me, I'll be back in a few days, love you. The next month in September, Colin and Hazel were actually spotted at, their romantic little spot, Castle Row Forest Park, and they were spotted by a member of their church who then snitched on them to the pastor of the church, Pastor John Hansford. And then another 2 months later, in November of 1990, Lesley actually went and told Pastor Hansford that she believed that Colin was having another affair. Colin really wasn't that secretive about it, I guess. Like, he was trying to be secretive, but he was just like shit at it. And Lesley had noticed him talking quietly on the phone at night while she was asleep, while he thought she was asleep. She noticed that his late nights at the practice were getting more frequent. She noticed that he was pulling away emotionally, just like he did when he was having his first affair as well. So she had just become very suspicious. And what's worse about all of this is the fact that in November of 1990, Lesley had just given birth to their 4th child, a son named Jonathan. So it was just a very, very emotional time, and she went and confided in Pastor Hanford about the fact that she thought Colin was having an affair. So the pastor went and spoke to Colin. Colin denied everything, and the pastor was like, okay, buddy. He obviously didn't buy it because people from the church had seen them. They weren't very sneaky. Lesley had now come to him, and she had a lot of reasons for feeling suspicious of Colin. So the pastor then went and spoke to Hazel, and at first Hazel denied the affair, but she admitted to being unhappy in her marriage with Trevor. She basically said that he was not exciting. The marriage wasn't exciting anymore. Basically, he's boring, he's lame, he's not ambitious, he doesn't want to go any further in his work, and I'm over it. And that was it. And then she drove the pastor home, and then while she was driving him home, she just broke down in tears and was like, yeah, we are actually having an affair. I'm sorry for lying to you about it, but it's not physical. It's just emotional. We've just been talking. So as soon as she drops the pastor home, Pastor Hansford gets in his car, drives straight to Lesley and told her the goss. And Lesley, of course, was devastated, but she was also a little bit relieved because she's like, okay, at least it wasn't physical. We can work through this. We can get through this. And Pastor Hansford offered to give both couples separately couples counseling if Colin and Hazel agreed to cut contact, or he said, an affair is actually grounds for divorce. Even though it wasn't a physical affair, it's still an affair, it's grounds for divorce, and the church will support you if that's what you choose to do. But both couples decided not to go ahead with divorce because obviously Colin is a very prideful man. He doesn't want the scandal of a divorce. He doesn't want the scandal of the affair. And so both couples decide to go ahead with the pastor's offer of counseling. Hazel and Colin cut contact and everything seems to be going pretty well for both of the couples. Then several weeks into the counseling session, Colin decided to come clean and say, actually, it was more, it was physical, it was sexual. And Lesley actually tried to end her own life over this. She tried to overdose on painkillers and she was admitted to Coleraine Hospital where her stomach was pumped and she was admitted there for 3 days. And it was more of a cry for help than anything. You know, it made her realize she didn't want to die. She wanted to be there for her children. They needed her. They were so young as well. And she also wanted to get better for herself, not just for her children, because you know, like, Colin had kind of made her a shell of her former self. She was this worldly, humorous, fun, outgoing, warm, ambitious woman, and she still was all of those things, but Colin had definitely kind of shrunk her down. And she was trying to become herself again. She was going to sunbed sessions, dyeing her hair, going to aerobics classes. She was doing things for herself again to get back to that woman that she was and still is. Trevor and Hazel also seem to be doing well in counseling. They both admitted to their own shortcomings. They were working through it. They pretty much avoided Lesley and Colin at all costs. Like, they would go to nighttime church sessions because Colin and Lesley would go to the morning ones. And Trevor, you know, he put pretty much all of the blame on his wife because she's the one married to him. She's the one that owes him something, not Colin. Like, Colin doesn't really know him from a bar of soap. They've just seen each other around. But obviously he just didn't like the guy. I mean, fair enough. Just didn't want to see him. Just didn't like him. And so the pastor suggested they do their own counseling session, Trevor and Colin, which they did. And they shook hands. Trevor accepted Colin's apology. Everyone seemed to be moving on. And that's exactly why in March of 1991, Colin called up Hazel because he's like, there's no way you're actually moving on. I don't buy it. And he was right because Hazel was like, true. And apparently she said to him on this phone call, I'm gonna love you until I'm old and grey. And just like that, their affair started right back up again. Colin was like giving Lesley tranquilizers so that they could sleep together while she was like tranquilized and asleep. They would go to Hazel and Trevor's house while Trevor was at work, while Trevor was asleep. And all the while, both couples are still in counseling and Lesley and Colin are doing really well. They're trying to work through things. They're trying to start dating again, bring back that spark. And they went on a date in May of 1991. They got a babysitter to look after the kids. And Lesley's dad, Harry, had also not been doing well. He was going through some health issues. And so Lesley said, come and stay at ours so we can look after you. She hated the thought of him being alone. So she said, come and stay at ours. And he did. And then when they got back from their date, Lesley went into the kitchen and her dad was dead on the floor. He had died of heart failure. I mean, poor Lesley just cannot catch a break. Their family was all super close as well, and it was absolutely devastating for Lesley and for their entire family. And then just 12 days later, Lesley went missing. On the 19th of May in 1991, Colin called up one of the elders of their church at around 8:30 a.m. His name was Jim Flanagan, and he said, I can't find Lesley anywhere. Can you please help me? Can you please go to her father's house in Castle Rock because she might be there grieving? And Jim said, of course. He went straight to Harry's house and he knocked on the door. Nobody answered. Nobody was home. And so he told Colin this. Colin said, can you please come over? I have something to show you. And while he was waiting for Jim, he called up the police, he called up the hospitals, and there was nothing. You know, there was no sign of Lesley. Jim gets to his house and he shows her a note that Lesley had left for him, and it read, Dear Colin, I'm just trying to go to sleep now. How long? I don't know. Thank you for your help over the past few days and for the good times in our marriage. I don't know what to say to you because I don't know how to feel, but I have seen that life goes on after a few weeks of pain, and let's face it, Colin, I am nothing in comparison to what you lost in the one you loved a while back. If I wake up in the morning, just let this be our secret. All my love, Lesley. And Colin told Jim that he was really worried that this was a suicide note. Jim ended up leaving to go back to church, and another church elder named Derek McCauley ended up coming over, and he noticed there was this like injury on Colin's head, like a small bump on his head. And Colin was like, yeah, Trevor came over last night. He was pissed. We got into an argument and he punched me and then he left. And he was worried that Lesley might have been with Trevor, that they were together. And then he also suggested to Derek that he go over to Lesley's dad Harry's house in Castle Rock to check if she was there because she might have gone there to grieve. So basically the same thing that he asked Jim to do. When Derek got to the house, the front door was locked, so he peered in the windows of the garage and he saw that Lesley's car was in the garage but couldn't see any signs of anybody else at the house or anybody at the house. It was just the car. So he gets back to Colin and he tells him, look, Lesley's car was there, but that's it. She wasn't there. Nobody was there. And Colin was like, I'm just sure they're missing something because if her car's there, she has to be there. Where else could she have gone without her car? So at 12:30, he calls Jim Flanagan again, and he says, please, can you just go back to Lesley's dad's house, check it again, I'll give you the keys this time so that you can go into the house and have a look. So Jim goes there with an off-duty police officer named David Green. They got to the house at about 1:20 p.m. They let themselves in with the keys and they went through the house separately. They went through all of the rooms one by one, did a really thorough search, and then eventually Jim makes it to the garage. And as soon as he opens the garage door, he's just hit in the face with the smell of exhaust fumes. And that is when they noticed the body of 32-year-old Trevor Buchanan slumped in the driver's seat of Lesley's car. The engine was off after having run out of gas. When they opened the boot of the car, they found the body of 31-year-old Lesley Howell lying there almost peacefully. It almost looked like she was sleeping. She had her headphones on playing worship music, and there were 3 photos around her body. One of her and her mother, one of her brother and her dad, and one of her and Colin. Jim and David, of course, immediately contacted the police, and they also called the pastor of their church so that he could let both Hazel and Colin know. The police arrived shortly after and they noted that there was a hose pipe, a vacuum hose pipe, that was connected from the exhaust and led into the boot of the car. The keys were also in the ignition of the car, so it looked like they were dealing with a double suicide. There were rumors that Trevor and Lesley had actually started their own affair together, and there were also rumors that they had decided to end their own lives together because neither of them could deal with the betrayal from both of their respective spouses. And this is what both Hazel and Colin believed and what they told the police when they were questioned. They were both pronounced dead at 2:15 p.m. by the forensic medical examiner, and he also noted that their bodies were both cold, so it seemed like they had died hours earlier. Obviously, one of the first things police did in the investigation was question Colin and Hazel for obvious reasons, and they were both very cooperative and denied having any involvement. Hazel gave an account of what the day was like for her and Trevor the day before the bodies were found. She said that morning she had suggested to Trevor they go on a trip to Lisbon, and on the drive there they got into an argument about Colin. At around 8:15 p.m. they were home. She went for a bike ride. She came home, she made dinner, her and Trevor watched some TV together, and then she went to bed at about 10:15 p.m. but Trevor decided to stay up. She said that after she fell asleep, she woke up at around 3 to 4 a.m. to the sound of Trevor and Lesley's voices, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. She woke up again at about 5 a.m. and Trevor was gone, and she looked out the window and his car was parked in front of the house instead of in the garage where it was normally parked. Colin's story was that Lesley had been out for most of the day running errands and that she got home at around 7:30 p.m. Later that night at around 11:15 p.m. Trevor came over, they got into an altercation, Trevor punched him, Trevor apologized, and then Trevor left. And Lesley did not leave with Trevor at this time. She was still home at around 12:05, and according to Colin, she was on the couch and she was very drunk. A coroner's report ultimately concluded that Trevor and Lesley had ended their own lives and their cause of death was listed as carbon monoxide poisoning. A toxicology report also confirmed this, and it also showed that Lesley had a high blood alcohol content, and she also had traces of temazepam, diazepam, and nordiazepam in her system. Trevor also was found to have traces of temazepam in his system, only temazepam, but this was concluded that this wasn't a contributing factor to their deaths. Why did Trevor have a tranquilizer in his system, you ask? I'm not sure. Nor were the police, but they didn't ask. Why did Lesley have tranquilizers in her system? Not sure. Nor were the police, but they didn't ask. I mean, the police really, like I said at the start of the video, botched the initial investigation. Pretty much all they did in this investigation was they went and got a couple of witness statements from friends, family, people who knew the couples, and concluded from that there was no evidence of any foul play. Then on the 28th of May, they had a meeting with a bunch of police officers where one officer kind of brought up concerns about Colin tranquilizing his wife and giving her drugs to put her to sleep. He said he was kind of concerned about this and, you know, maybe thought that Colin could have contributed to his wife's death or been responsible for his wife's death. But this was ultimately dismissed. The case was closed and it was ruled a double suicide. And that was that. So you see what I mean? Like, it really wasn't much of an investigation. They just kind of... and missed a lot of important information. So we will get into that. Colin and Hazel continued to see each other despite their tragic losses, and there were some reports online that Colin would have to tranquilize. He loves tranquilizing people. He would tranquilize Hazel with drugs that he took from his dental practice in order for them to have sex, to like move past the guilt. Hazel ended up deciding that she needed to leave this relationship. It was very toxic, so she moved on with a guy that she had dated in her teenage years named Trevor McCauley, and that relationship didn't last for very long either because she ended up cheating on him as well. Has a thing for cheating on guys named Trevor, I guess. This time she was cheating on him with a guy named David Stewart, and David Stewart was the former chief superintendent of the IUC, so not too dissimilar from the job that her late husband was doing, but maybe a bit higher up because, you know, she kept saying that she wasn't happy with Trevor's lack of ambition to climb the ranks and earn more money. David and Hazel ended up getting married in 2005, and it seemed like Hazel was, you know, finally starting to move on with her life, move on from the events of 1991. Colin also moved on. He met a woman at a Christian singles night that he hosted in 1996. He met a woman named Carl Jorgensen. She was a divorced American woman who had moved to Northern Ireland, and they met, they hit it off, they got married in 1997 and had a baby the following year, and they went on to have 5 children in total. So Colin ended up having 9 kids, 4 from his marriage with Lesley and 5 from his marriage with Kyle. In a tragic turn of events, one of his sons, Matthew, from his first marriage with Lesley, actually died in 2007 from an accidental fall while studying abroad in St. Petersburg in Russia. During Colin's marriage to Kyle, he was unfaithful a number of times. I guess he was just a habitual cheater, and a leopard never changes its spots. Anyway, so basically by this point everyone's kind of moved on. They're married. Colin and Kyle are married but kind of on the rocks, and then Hazel and David are in the same position, married but kind of on the rocks. And then on the 29th of January in 2009, the church elders from the Coleraine Church get a call from Kyle, and she says, "Hey, can you come to our house? Colin has a confession to make." And they kind of think it's gonna be another confession of, "Oh, I've cheated on my wife, please forgive me, blah, blah, blah." But boy, were they wrong. They were right that he was making confession, but for once, it was not a confession of him cheating on his wife. It was something very, very different. So he said that he had lost £350,000 in a scam and that he owed a lot of money to a lot of different patients of his. And he also felt like the loss and death of his son Matthew was God punishing him. And so it was time to repent. And as he was repenting and confessing, his wife Kyle was there, who had heard all of this. She called the church elders because she's like, "You guys have to hear this." And all of the church elders were there like reading Bible verses. It sounded like a very interesting situation. But basically he confessed that he had committed a sin by having premarital sex with his late wife Lesley and allowing her to get 3 abortions. And he had also done the same thing with Hazel, had an affair with her, and then allowed her to get an abortion. Allowed. He also admitted to raping a bunch of his patients for a 10-year period between 1998 and 2008. While they were under sedation, he would rape them. So who even knows how many women he raped and molested. He claimed he just could not fight his sexual urges. And then, last but not least, he admitted to murdering Lesley and Trevor and staging it to look like a double suicide. And everybody was so dumbfounded and shocked at this revelation and this confession, except for his wife Kyle, who had actually known since 1998. And she agreed to keep the secret out of fear, but then he cheated on her and she decided to force him to confess. So I guess that's where Kyle draws her line at cheating. Oh, you murdered your wife and your mistress's husband? No worries. Let's get married. Let's have 5 kids together. But cheating? Absolutely not. How dare you? Anyway, so Obviously, the Coleraine Police Department was called and Colin was taken down to the station for questioning, and he admitted to everything, but he said that he was not alone in committing these crimes. He was assisted by his ex-mistress, Hazel Buchanan. And then he went into great detail about how they committed the murders, how they covered it up, and how they ultimately got away with it for almost 20 years. So he said that on the 14th of May 1991, he met up with Hazel and basically said, hey, I want to kill my wife and your husband so that we can be together and I have a plan. Allegedly, he didn't go into too much detail. He told her he was going to make it look like a double suicide and that he needed her help to sedate Trevor, to open the garage door, and to move Trevor's car out of the way. He gave Hazel a packet of temazepam pills, which is basically like a medication used to treat insomnia. So if you take it, you are gonna be out. And he said, crush this up, put it in his food on the 18th of May 1991, which is the day everything was gonna happen and he was gonna execute this plan, which also happened to be his youngest son's birthday. So for his son's birthday, he was gonna kill his mother. Great guy. So that night, the night of the 18th of May, he was in the garage setting up or packing down his son's birthday present, which was a slide. And he basically cut a baby bottle to fit around the exhaust of the car. And then he got a hose pipe and attached it to this baby bottle and then ran it into the living room where Lesley was sleeping. He put the hose right up next to her face and then went and turned the car on. But when she started to get agitated in her sleep, he was worried she would wake up. So he went back into the living room and pulled the doona up over her head so she would be trapped kind of under the doona with all of the fumes. And apparently as he did this, she cried out for her son Matthew, but of course Matthew never came and Lesley eventually passed away. At the time of her death, she was 31 years old and her son Matthew was 6, her daughter Lauren was 4, and her 2 youngest children, Daniel and Jonathan, were 2 and 9 months old respectively. After her death, Colin dressed her lifeless body before carrying her and putting her into the boot of her own car. He covered her with a white sheet and then he threw a bike on top of her. He then went and detached the hose pipe and the baby bottle and put them in the car as well with him. And then last minute, he decided to grab the cassette tape and the 3 photos that were found with Lesley's body when her body was discovered. At around 1 a.m, he called Hazel and hung up after the first ring and waited for her to call him back. And when she did call him, he said that he was done with Lesley and he was coming to her place to execute the rest of the plan. When he arrived at the Buchanan household, he got the hose and the baby bottle out of the car and then Hazel was there to meet him. He pointed to the white sheet in the back of the car and said, "That's Lesley." Hazel confirmed that Trevor was asleep, that she had crushed up the sedatives Colin had given her and put them in a tuna sandwich. So Colin attached the baby bottle and the hose pipe to the exhaust of the car and ran it through to the bedroom where Trevor was unconscious inside. He put the other end of the hose pipe next to Trevor's face and went back out and turned the car on. Trevor actually ended up waking up, so Colin had to go in. There was an altercation, that's why he had the injuries on his head. He did manage to eventually pin Trevor's arms down under a quilt and he forced the hose pipe into Trevor's mouth. When Trevor finally succumbed to the toxic fumes, Colin dragged his body into the garage and told Hazel that everything was going to be fine. He passed her the hose pipe and the baby bottle that he had used and told her to cut them up before cleaning the bathroom, which she did as soon as he left. Colin then took the bike out of the car. He placed Trevor's body on top of Lesley's and then covered them both with the white sheet before putting the bike back on top of them. He then drove their bodies in Lesley's car to Lesley's dad's house in Castle Rock. Before backing into the driveway, he opened the boot, got the bike out because he was planning on leaving the car there, so he was going to leave on the bike, and he reversed Lesley's car into her dad's driveway. As you might remember from earlier, Lesley's dad passed away just 12 days prior to this, so the house was vacant and that's why he decided to use this house to stash the bodies. Once he reversed the car into the garage, he put on surgical gloves, removed Trevor's body and placed him into the driver's seat of the car with one leg still hanging out. He then went and removed the white sheet from on top of Lesley's body, placed the headphones and the cassette tape on her, and placed the 3 photos around her body. He then grabbed a vacuum hose and attached that to the exhaust pipe and then led that into the boot of the car, closing the boot on top of it so that it would stay in place. After this, he put the white sheets into a black bag that he had brought. He jogged over to where he'd left the bike and then he cycled home, and when he was at home, he called Hazel to let her know that The deed was done. The suicide note that he had presented to the church elders the next day was actually one that Lesley had previously written and he had saved for this occasion. And he said that that was it, that was everything that happened. All in all, from start to finish, it took him about 4 hours. So Colin Howell was, of course, arrested on the same day that he made the confession, and he was charged with 2 counts of murder on the 3rd of February in 2009. When they went and arrested Hazel, she did not play along with Colin's story. Her take was that Colin had manipulated her into part of the murders and that she was simply a victim of coercion. She totally denied the charges when questioned over the course of 2 days, but the police, of course, were not going to stop there. They knew that she was involved, and they eventually got her to admit some involvement in the crimes, but she was still planning to plead not guilty. And strangely enough, Colin also planned to plead not guilty. Colin's trial was scheduled first, and just days before it was due to begin, on the 18th of November 2010, he actually changed his plea to guilty. During the trial, the prosecution accepted that Colin was not motivated by money, but they did make note that he received over £414,000 as a result of his wife and father-in-law's deaths, because of course, when Lesley's father, Harry, died, Lesley got her inheritance, which then, when she died 12 days later, Colin got that money. A psychiatric evaluation was carried out, and an expert was of the opinion that Colin suffered from a psychotic episode while he was in custody, and that he also had a severe personality disorder. But thankfully, this wasn't enough to get him off the hook, and on the 3rd of December 2010, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. The judge noted that if he hadn't pled guilty, he actually would have considered a sentence of 28 years imprisonment appropriate. Hazel's trial began in March of 2011. It spanned 15 days and her fate was going to be sealed by a jury. Colin actually gave evidence at the trial for the prosecution, and the court heard that Hazel helped plan the murders and then disposed of the evidence. It was heard that she also received financial gain from the murder of her husband, but it was noted that it wasn't quite as significant as what Colin received. During her trial, police tapes from 2 years prior, when she was arrested, were played to the court, and these tapes were, like I said, from the time she was arrested, and it was the first sort of admission of guilt they got from her. So I'll read you some of the quotes of what she said on these tapes. I want to say sorry to Trevor's family. My guilt was horrendous, my shame. I'm sorry to David, my husband, who I love so much. I'm sorry to Lisa and Andrew, my children, who are my life. Colin was a very cold and calculated person. I had no motive. He wanted me more than I wanted him. I'll regret this to the day I die. I've destroyed lives. I don't know if it was love or fear. He had control over me. It was like I was his little robot. She also admitted to the Detective Sergeant Ferris, who was conducting the interview, that she should have tried to prevent the murders. She said, quote, "I could have stopped it." Ferris responded, "But you allowed it to happen. You were part of a plan, Hazel, to murder 2 people. It was near the perfect murder. You got close, very close, but it doesn't always work out like that." She also really changed her tune from the time that she was arrested until her trial. I think as the years went by, as time went by, the guilt kept growing, and then, I mean, she had like 20 years to feel guilty. So I don't know if it was that. I think also as it was getting closer to the trial, things were just not looking good for her. She was probably scared to go to prison, and so she just came clean, maybe thinking that it would look better for her. I think the reason that she chose to fight the charges and also maybe chose to kind of admit a little bit of guilt is because she was hoping that the jury would find that she was manipulated and that she wasn't as guilty as Colin. That maybe she was also a victim, and that's why she committed these murders. I mean, thankfully, in the end, the jury did not see it that way, because she had 20 years to come clean. If she had been manipulated, she wasn't with him anymore, she could have come clean at any point. If she really felt guilty, she could have come clean about what happened. She could have prevented these murders from happening, but she didn't. And so thankfully, in the end, on the 16th of March in 2011, she was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years for her involvement in the murders. And at the time of sentencing, she was 48 years old. The judge presiding over her case, Mr. Justice Hart, said, quote, "While she knew Howell was murdering her husband in another room, she waited and did nothing to save his life." He added, "Had she had a spark of compassion for her husband, even at that late stage, she would have tried to prevent his murder. She could have told someone else, she could have told the police, and even after Lesley Howell had been murdered, she could have prevented Howell from entering the house and killing her husband by any one of a number of actions, such as not opening the garage door to him, locking the door against him, waking her husband husband, ringing the police, or alerting her neighbor, to mention but a few. He also said that she was infatuated with Howell, whom he described as a charismatic, manipulative, hypocritical man with a very considerable sexual appetite. Hazel is currently incarcerated at Hydebank Prison in Belfast, and Colin is currently serving his sentence at Magbury High Security Prison in Co-Antrim. It's honestly insane that it took so long for this case to be solved, so long to put them away, so long to get justice and any sort of closure for Lesley and Trevor and their families, because really the police should have been able to solve this case a lot sooner. There was so much evidence that they missed. I feel like Blind Freddy could have solved this case 20 years sooner. And the RUC actually had to issue an apology to Trevor and Lesley's families because of the immense criticism they got for how they handled this investigation, or mishandled this investigation, I should say. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these clues and this evidence that the RUC either missed or just completely ignored that could have helped them solve this case a lot sooner. First of all, it was Colin that suggested they go and check the garage at Lesley's dad's house, not once, but 3 times, and detectives didn't even question it. They weren't like, oh, how did you know she was there? Why did you keep insisting we check this one spot? 3 times in one morning, you know? People kept coming back to him, oh, there's nothing there. He's like, no, there's definitely 2 bodies. Definitely 2 dead bodies in there. You should go and check again. And he didn't go and check himself, not once. Didn't even suggest that somebody look after his kids or anything while he goes to check. And detectives didn't even question it. They didn't even question, why do you keep directing people there? Why is there nowhere else in the whole world that she could be? Just her dad's house. The car, Lesley's car that Trevor and Lesley were found in, was not forensically tested. And even the hose pipe found at the car was not sent off for examination, was not sent off and tested for fingerprints or DNA or anything like that. Then there was the post-mortem photos, which showed that Trevor had injuries to his mouth, his nose, and the back of his head, likely from the scuffle that he had with Colin when Colin was trying to murder him. Some people actually noticed these injuries as well at Trevor's wake, and they brought them up with the RUC. The RUC went and questioned Colin, and Colin just gave them that story of, yeah, he came to my house and punched me and then he left. And that was that. They didn't go any further into it. Just that he had gotten into a fight with the husband of the woman he was having an affair with the night before he was murdered. Hello? Human blood was also found on Trevor's sweatshirt that he had been wearing when his body was found, and they sent it off forensic testing, determined that it was human blood, and then that was it. They didn't look into that any further. They didn't try to match that blood to anyone. There's just human blood on this guy's sweatshirt who is now deceased, and we're not gonna look into it. Another thing was actually the position of Trevor in Lesley's car. Obviously, he was found in the driver's seat, and Colin and Trevor were very different heights. Trevor was a lot taller than Colin, and Colin didn't account for that. He didn't move the driver's seat back to support Trevor's height, and so he put Trevor in there, kind of stuffed him in there, but his feet didn't fit. So one of his legs was hanging out of the driver's side door. The driver's side door was still open, and the RUC didn't even question this. If he was driving the car, wouldn't he have made his body fit so he could sit in there properly? And wouldn't he want to close the door? And the window was open too. Wouldn't he want to close the door, fit in properly so he could close the door, close the window? Because if he was trying to end his own life, he would want the fumes to stay in the car, right? And the RUC didn't clock any of that or just ignored it, I don't know. The RUC also knew that Colin and Hazel were lying about parts of their affair, and yet they still took them as credible witnesses. They still took them at face value for everything else they were saying, even though they knew they were lying about parts of their affair. They took Colin at face value on why he had that injury on his face right after his wife and his mistress's husband were dead. He had a mysterious injury, and they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. You guys just got into a fight the night before he turned up dead. That's reasonable. His account on Lesley's movements the day before her murder were also questioned by a lot of other witnesses who had actually seen her the day before her murder, and police still didn't question him. They still just took him at face value and took him as a credible witness, even though they knew, or they had all of this evidence that he was clearly lying about many different things. They also had a report that Colin had dropped an electric cord into a bath that Lesley was happening a month before her murder. She called her friend in April of 1991, and she was like, this weird thing happened, and I just have to tell you just in case it's something. But basically she had gone to have a bath, and she took a cassette tape into the bath so she could listen to music. And Colin came into the bath. He's like, I need the cassette tape. And then as he's grabbing it, he like drops the cord into the bath. And she said, she told her friend she felt a little shock from it. And she called her friend to be like, look, I'm sure it's nothing, but just in case he's trying to kill me, just in case it wasn't an accident. Colin actually recalled this incident, and he said that it happened while they were having an argument about Lesley thinking that he was cheating again, which he was, by the way, obviously. So he claims that she had the cassette tape on the edge of the bath, and he basically warned her, like, you shouldn't have it so close to the bath because it could electrocute you. He claims he had no intention of doing it, but that he allegedly showed her the cord in a threatening way and then dropped it to the floor. I guess he wanted to scare her. And the RUC dismissed this, just like chose to ignore it. This man threatened his wife. She called her friend being like, my husband might have just tried to kill me, a month before she wound up dead. And the RUC was like, couldn't have been related. Also couldn't have been related was the fact that a bunch of Lesley's friends reported that Colin had been sedating Lesley because Lesley had told them, I'm pretty sure this is happening. I'm pretty sure he keeps sedating me. But this was never looked into further. When it came to motive, they didn't consider the fact that Colin was having severe financial difficulties and received over £400,000 in life insurance after Lesley passed away. As a result of all of these things that they totally overlooked in their investigation, which is just insane and so frustrating because this case went unsolved for 20 years when probably a toddler could have solved this case. But as a result, in 2011, the police ombudsman released a statement on the investigation and said that it was, quote, deeply flawed and lacking objectivity, subsequently letting down the families of both victims. In an interview with the Belfast Telegram, Hazel gave an interview and told what she believed was her side of the story. And she said, quote, people say, why did you let that go on so long? Why did you not leave? And I think that was the reason. I was scared to leave him because I didn't know what he'd do. I didn't know what he'd do, and he had so much on me that he held all the power. I felt totally isolated, couldn't talk to my family, I couldn't talk to nobody. So even after being found guilty and being sent to prison, she still cannot take accountability for her role in these murders. It just shows that she has no remorse. She's only remorseful that she got caught because at any time while the murders were taking place, she could have prevented them from happening, or at least prevented Trevor's murder from happening. And then over the next 20 years, at any point, she could have come and confessed. It's not like she was still with Colin. She could have come forward at any point if she felt an ounce of remorse and guilt. Since 2011, she has filed 2 appeals, both of which have been dismissed. Colin also received another 5.5-year sentence for sexually assaulting 5 women while under sedation at his dental practice. He was sentenced in 2011, but then questioned again in 2018 about more women that he may have sexually assaulted. And it turns out that these further allegations that he was questioned for in 2018 had actually come from Hazel. And if you remember, Colin had actually also been sedating Hazel after the murder so that they could have consensual sex to get past the guilt that they felt about the murders, which I don't really know if you can call it consensual if you have to sedate someone to have sex with you. Hazel claims that it was not consensual. From what I can gather online as well, Hazel's husband David is supporting her throughout this whole thing, throughout her incarceration and her ongoing appeals as well. But yeah, that's everything for this case. That's it from me today. I would love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments down below because it is truly so insane and so incredibly frustrating that it took so long to solve when I feel like I could have solved this case in my sleep. I feel like an inanimate object could have solved this case. The amount of evidence that was missed, I don't even think it was missed. It must have just been ignored because how can you miss all of these things that are right in front of you? Like they're right in front of their eyes and they were just like, ugh. It's probably nothing. It is truly baffling. It is truly so baffling. Did Colin have them on his payroll? Like, did the church have them on their payroll? I don't understand. There's no way. There's no way they missed all of that. So there's gotta be something else going on or something surely. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this case. That's everything from me today. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.